Hi, everyone. So thank you to the Sustainable Brands team for having me here today. Wow, it's very bright, isn't it? The last time I was in front of lights this bright with a microphone on, I think I was doing karaoke in a banana costume, but we won't talk about that today. Today, well, one of the advantages of speaking kind of halfway through the second day is that I've met quite a few of you, so it's nice, it feels like I'm talking to friends. But of course, the disadvantage is that you're dying for your lunch, and you're sat there thinking, oh my God, he's going to talk about metrics. What could be worse? I just want to eat. So I'll try and keep it as interesting and as short as possible, but I do have a lot to cover, so please bear with me. Okay. So why am I here? Okay, why am I here? I used to work I worked for 15 years in the tech sector, but like many of you, I had a moment where I realized what was happening to the world, societal problems, environmental problems, and thought, I've got to do something about this. And I was lucky enough to get a job working at a think tank and consultancy based in London called Sustainability, who've been around for about 28 years working with global companies to help them become more sustainable. And I had the chance to work with some of the world's biggest, best-known brands, including BASF and Ford, to really help them transition to more sustainable ways of doing things. And I had a chance to work with some great people. I learned a lot, but there were two things I didn't learn. And that's why I left sustainability a year ago to go and try and figure those two things out. And those two things are answers to these questions. Okay? How would we know a truly sustainable company if we saw one? We all know we've got to get better, we've got to do more with less and so forth, but how would we know when we actually get there? We heard earlier about embracing circular economy principles. Absolutely, we have to. Every company has to do it. But how will we know when we've got there? And the second question is, okay, knowing the destination is really important, knowing when we've got there is important, but also we need to know how to measure progress toward it. Because otherwise, how do we course correct and steer in the right way? These feel like really simple questions, don't they? And they are. It's just the answers aren't simple at all. And I've spent the last kind of 2 years trying to figure these things out. So why are they so important, these questions? Well, if we take a look at some of these trends, I don't know if you can see the captions back there, but we have some, the red number here on each graph is 50 years ago, okay? So look what's happened in the last 50 years on all sorts of dimensions, from fertilizer consumption, ocean acidification, capture of fish, and so forth. We're basically completely hitting the limits of what our social fabric and our natural systems can cope with. Governments aren't stepping up, governments aren't moving quick enough. We need a new kind of leadership, and we need it from business. And a lot of business leaders understand this. But why aren't they acting? Why aren't they doing more quickly? Well, of course, part of the challenge is that our entire economic system only really focuses on financial information. Financial performance trumps everything else. And every business is required by law to file their accounts in a standard way. And investors use that information. They can compare that information because it's all in a standard way to figure out where to put their money. And every public company CEO and CFO really cares about that stuff because the cost of capital is a huge influence on their ability to grow their companies. So when it comes to non-financial information, what happens? Well, we have these great things called sustainability reports, which, many years ago, it was thought were going to change everything. Right now, everyone would understand what a company is doing in the non-financial space, and would be able to. Investors would take account of what that activity was doing, and factor that into their decisions. But of course, sustainability reports are often quite long, quite complicated. Investors, if they look at them at all, barely glance at them. So what we've got these organizations, aggregators, who take all the financial and non-financial data for a big proportion of the world's companies and mix it all up and put it in a database, and investors can access it, for example, from their Bloomberg terminals. Right? Great, access to the data, but what investor has got time to try and figure out what all these hundreds of sustainability indicators around greenhouse gases or social impact or whatever are actually doing and why they matter. So we still haven't really solved this problem, and we've got another group of organizations which we'll get to in a minute, raters and researchers. But actually, to make sense of this data, to get the markets actually embedding sustainability performance in the way it should be, so that companies who are doing more are getting rewarded for it, there are a lot of organizations out there who are trying to make things better. Every one of those organizations is doing some great things, but it doesn't half look complicated, doesn't it? If you're a company trying to figure out, how to do your next report or whatever, it gets pretty complicated pretty quickly. And for a while, it looked like these guys down here, the sustainability ratings and researchers, were going to fix all this. The idea is really simple, that you basically look at a company's non-financial information, you get them to fill in a questionnaire or something, and then you give them a score to say how sustainable they are. Okay. Brilliant idea in theory. If investors just had one number to look at to see how sustainable a company is, wouldn't that be easy for everyone? Trouble is, it doesn't work. Here's an example of how it doesn't work. I don't want to pick out this particular company or this particular rater as bad, but this is a really good example. So the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, or DJSI, one of the world's best known and most respected sustainability ratings, okay, in October last year, told Thai Oil that it was 85% sustainable. Okay, this makes me want to scream. An oil company. I mean, the whole oil sector needs to completely transform its business model into something new if we're going to avoid catastrophic climate change. And it needs to do it in the next couple of decades. And we're telling its CEO that it's 85% sustainable? What message is that going to send to him and his investors? That's nuts. There's something wrong with the way we're measuring this stuff. Okay? Which comes back to my question. How would you know a completely sustainable company if you saw one? How do you know what 100% looks like until you can answer that question? We need a new kind of metric, a new way to measure stuff. Here's a company today. Here's where they were in the past, here's where they were in the future. Okay? Typically, sustainability performance, environmental and social performance, is measured in one of three ways. Relative to a baseline year, a company will say, we've reduced our water use by 20% since 1990. Well, so what? How bad were you in 1990? Doesn't really tell me anything. Second approach is comparing relative to other companies. Now, we all know that looking at what your competitors are doing is important in many aspects of business, but it's really dangerous when it comes to environmental and social performance, because you end up focusing on best practice, current best practice, where everybody is today, rather than required practice, which is where we all need to be tomorrow if we're going to be living within the boundaries of our finite planet and helping rather than hindering our social fabric. And the third approach is short-term goals that the company set itself. And I worked with a lot of companies when I was at Sustainability who were trying to set goals. Inevitably, a company will only publish a goal. Actually, there are some exceptions. Almost inevitably, companies will only publish goals and targets if they're pretty sure they're going to hit them. Okay? So this will be the kind of, we're going to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 30% in the next 5 years. Okay, how did you come up with that target? Was that based on what you thought you could do, or was that based on what the science says? And that takes us to the science. What we really need to be doing is not measuring progress relative to baseline years or short-term goals or best practice. We need to be measuring progress toward the sustainable future. Where does every company need to get if it's to be considered truly sustainable? On every major environmental and social issue, what's the minimum a company needs to do to get its entry ticket into a sustainable economy? Okay? Enter the FutureFit Business benchmark, which is why I quit sustainability just over a year ago. Idiot that I am. So, the FutureFit Business benchmark, here we go, is future-focused. So it measures progress of a company based on where it needs to be, tomorrow's required practice versus today's best practice. It's science-based. How on earth do we know what a company has to look like in the future? Well, we can figure out what a sustainable society needs to look like, a society that can go on flourishing, or at least has the possibility of flourishing forever because we're not damaging our social fabric and the natural systems we depend upon. We can define that with science and work backwards. It's co-created. We're a very small team. You're looking at about a third of it right now. So we're co-creating this. The good news is a lot of brilliant work has been done by a lot of organizations out there that we can draw on and just collate and curate rather than create. And we're giving it away. Okay? A lot of ratings out there, they'll give you a score and then they'll say, well, pay us and we'll come and help you get better at that score. That's not going to scale. Okay? What we need to do is build something in a completely open, transparent way and then let anyone, any institutional investor, pension fund or whatever, any company use it for free. Okay. So that's what we're doing. Raphael, I realized while you were speaking how beautiful your slides were. I think the most words you had on any one slide were 5. Please help me with my next presentation. I don't know what happened to me on this one. Sorry. This is an exception. I'm sorry. So anyway, I will very quickly go through this. You don't have to read it. In fact, please don't, because then you won't hear me. So this will help companies in the sense that it will really help companies, people across a company, get together and understand what really matters and why. What should the company be prioritizing? Where are the major gaps between where it is now and where it needs to be? Also, for brands, there's an additional benefit here in that if you really are, Raphael talked about a manifesto, if you really are setting out a position for how you want to contribute to the future we all want, then being able to look to some independent third-party standard grounded in science and say our fair share of what needs to happen in the future is this, and that's what we're committing to, even if it takes us 10 years to get there. That's the kind of credibility that can underpin that kind of manifesto. For investors, this will deliver a concise, credible, and comparable set of metrics that they can use across any company to factor into their investment decisions. And it's some people say mainstream investors don't care about this stuff. There probably are a lot of them out there like that, the kind of ones that you see in the films, right? But there are a lot, pension funds and people like that, who really do care about this stuff. It's just they can't figure out what to do about it with all the, noise around stuff, and everyone's got different kinds of targets, and no one's saying anything in a comparable way. So that's what we're trying to address to help them factor this in, and we're talking to pension funds about how they can use this benchmark to factor into their investment decisions going forward. Okay, sounds like a reasonable idea, doesn't it? How the hell do you build it? So there are 3 steps. Firstly, you've got to figure out, well, what should the sustainable future look like? How will we know it when we see it? And there's some great work being done on the science for that, which I'll briefly touch through. We then need to figure out, okay, if that's where we need to be, and this is the kind of stuff that business does today, then what are the goals we need to hit? What are the main issues we need to address? And what are the goals we need to hit to ensure that we're not breaking those principles, that we actually get to where we need to get? And we call these our FutureFit Goals. That's what required practice looks like. But of course, that's the destination. That's the endpoint we want companies to aim for. But to get there, you need to be able to measure progress towards it. And that's the FutureFit KPIs. Take you briefly through all 3 steps. The first step, we've been able to cheat. Always nice. There's an organization out there called The Natural Step. It's been around for about 25 years, whose founders came up with a systems-based definition of what a sustainable society needs to look like. And it's just a few high-level principles. It's been used by many of the world's leading companies. Interface, we heard from before, a lot of the stuff that Ray Anderson was driving was grounded in the natural step thinking and their entire Mission Zero strategy. There's been a lot of other companies that have used this as a way to decide where you need to be and then work backwards to figure out how to get there. It's been in many academic journals, books, and so forth. You can find out about it everywhere. I'm not going to go through what the principles are now, but there's some pretty obvious high-level things, like no one will contribute to a build-up of synthetic substances in nature in the sustainable future. Okay? They're high-level, they're easily understandable, but they're not very actionable for business. So that's where deriving the FutureFit Goals comes in. As I said, there's a lot of great work out there for us to build on. These organizations have all published some fantastic stuff around planetary boundaries, around systemic risks, around the kind of indicators that companies should be measuring already, all that kind of stuff. And we've looked at all of their recommendations, all their guidance out there, and we've kind of synthesized it, boiled it down, and cross-referenced it with those principles to figure out what our FutureFit goals should be. Okay? I'm not going to go through them all now. We published our first public draft of the benchmark with all these goals, 28 goals across 9 areas of business activity in October. You can download it from our website, futurefitbusiness.org. We would love to get public feedback from you on those goals. We've already got a lot, and we're publishing a second draft of the benchmark with the first early version of the KPI stuff in June to coincide with Sustainable Brands in San Diego. But here you can see we map everything out in this very simple diagram where you have a company that can only thrive within a flourishing society, which itself can only flourish if the planet is capable of meeting its needs, healthy planet. Okay? And then you've got the general things that businesses do. And the goals focus on the products and services customers deliver and the way they deliver them, as well as, of course, its relationships with its stakeholders. I'm going to go through just a couple of examples given the time. Here's one. Products do not force customers to emit greenhouse gases during use. Okay? Let's look at the automotive sector as an example of where that could really matter. We heard mention of Tesla before. Fantastic company building electric cars. If you're Tesla, you've already hit that goal. If you're any other motor company out there, then you haven't, because almost every vehicle you're selling has got an internal combustion engine in it. And if you want to drive that even a few feet, you are forced to emit greenhouse gases. Now, yes, you could power a Tesla electric vehicle using electricity generated from a coal-fired power station. You could do, but Tesla doesn't force you. But if you've got a car with an internal combustion engine in it, you're forced to. Okay? Now, Ford here have got a really interesting strategy, which everyone should look at, called the glide path strategy, where they've mapped out how quickly they need to change their product line to be electric cars versus petrol cars if they're going to fit within their fair share of the global carbon budget. Very good strategy, real future fit thinking. I need to speed up. Community goal, I won't go into detail. Taxes, right? Creative tax avoidance, even if legal, is not good for your brand. Starbucks, Amazon, and Google recently found this out in the UK, where there's been a lot of backlash from consumers. Another one, paying everybody in your supply chain a living wage. This isn't the same as a minimum wage. A living wage is enough to have a decent standard of living for a family of 4. Okay, which in many regions is far higher than a legal minimum wage. H&M is one brand who's already committed to doing this. I think it's 985,000 people in their supply chain they've figured out, right down to the people who pick the cotton. And they're making sure, I can't remember the dates, 2020 or 2025 or something like that, they will be paying everybody a living wage. So that's the goals. In terms of developing the KPIs, so how do we measure progress towards them? We're relying on partners wherever possible. So collating and curating what's out there, particularly stuff from academic journals that businesses would never come across, and pulling it all together. The emphasis here is on simplifying. I showed you all those other initiatives at the beginning. Okay. The last thing we want to do is add another one to the 100 or so that are already out there and just give people something else to worry about. So one of the things we're making sure with all of this is whenever we articulate what a particular goal is, we say, this is how it links to the circular economy, or this is how it links to the Sustainable Development Goals, and all that kind of stuff. So you can see this is one place to go to figure out what you need to be doing and why. And I mentioned my background was in the software sector, where I learned the value of getting something built quickly that is useful enough that early adopters will look at it, use it, and give you feedback. And then you improve it, and you get out another version and so forth. So on that basis, we're coming out with the first set of KPIs this year. Oh God, I've got a flashing clock now. Under pressure. I'll be really quick. Sorry, lunch is waiting, I know. Just give me 2 more minutes. So in terms of the KPIs themselves, when most people think of a KPI, they think of this bit, this bottom green box. How do you measure just the kind of annual progress? Where are you now versus where you need to be? Okay? That's important. But when you're talking about FutureFit goals, some of these might take you 10, 20 years to hit. Right? So it's also important to tell consumers and to tell investors and everybody else what your ambition is. What have you publicly committed to? So we have a status indicator that shows where you are on your journey. So even some of the brands we've heard from here, like Levi's, doing some fantastic stuff around repurposing products. They know they're nowhere near where they need to be, but they've embraced the ambition, they've publicly committed to it, and they've assessed the gap between where they are now and where they need to be, whether it's using cotton versus polyester and so forth. So they would already start scoring on this. And then, of course, you've got to put current performance in context. Oh, someone actually did give me 2 more minutes. That's so nice. Thank you. It's not flashing at me anymore. Fantastic. I don't know. It's lovely. It's like Christmas come up. It's fantastic. So I'm wasting it now. Sorry. Concentrate. Okay. So you've got the status. Where are you on the journey? You've got what's your performance today, and then you've got the trajectory. So you commit to a plan. You say where you're going to be by when, and here's where we are right now. So investors can look at this and not just get a sense of where you are now, but where you're going. And that's really important for long-term investors like pension funds. So just to sum up, being a sustainable company is not about being better than last year or slightly better than your peers. It's about doing enough to safeguard the possibility that humanity can flourish on planet Earth forever. Okay. The question is, no one has ever actually said what enough is, and that's what we're doing with the science here. So the benchmark is going to give you something to aim for and a way to measure progress toward it as well. Okay, I don't notes where we're going. We don't need notes. So that's about it. We would love to work with other companies. We're working with 2 companies right now to help make sure that the KPIs we develop are actually useful and usable. And if there are other companies here who would like to work with us on this, partner with us on this, then it'd be fantastic to hear from you. Thank you for being so patient and enjoy your lunch. Thanks.